mass communicate. Mass communicate.
In December of 1997, Dan Hantman, you, Benjy, Mark Rigopoulos, and Kevin Sturtz founded an email mailing list that would come to be known as DiscussBiscuits. And you actually wrote the second ever post on DiscussBiscuits. And that post, I will read you right now. Mike Gordon showed up last night at a Disco Biscuits show at the TLA. While I wasn't enthralled over the show, except for the Pygmy Twilight, which as always kicked ass, it was cool that Mike was there. I had been trying to get Tom Marshall and Richard Gere, an author and journalist who had written a very excellent book about fish, to see them on Sunday at Worcester and to bring Trey and Co., but they couldn't make it to do Fish's pig roast that they were having that day for close friends and family. Anyway, I saw Mike briefly at the after show and he looked at my biscuit shirt and smiled. A few hours later, he walked right into the TLA and got to see the last half hour of the show before going backstage to find out what nug huffing is all about. Give us the context. Fill in the story. How did you spread the word, apart from wearing the t-shirt, handing out the tapes? How were you making these connections at this point?
Well, first of all, that is amazing because I had obviously not revisited that post since writing it. Do you have a date for when that was?
That would have been posted on December 4th, 1997, and the show was on December 12th at the TLA.
Yeah, incredible. What I remember from that night, before talking about how I made these connections, what I remember from that night was the most vivid memory that endures to this day was having to get Mike Gordon backstage because I had a credential and he did not, and having to tell the security guy that this was actually the guy that just played the arena, and to let him back. And then I think I vaguely remember being somewhat embarrassed by Jason Melham telling Mike that some version of Runaway Jim from the previous week had cracked his skull in half or something like that, and embarrassed in a that might not be the right, embarrassed in a joking way, but I, through my online endeavors and through writing so much about it online and about fish in particular before DiscussBiscuits, I got a copy of an upcoming Fish album, Billy Breathes, and I did what I would have done with a live show. I went through it and described it song by song, so that people could hear it. Not hear it, so that people would know what to expect from it. And this song's gonna be like this song, whatever. I got an email back from a guy that claimed to be Tom Marshall. And he just said, "Hey, I really loved your review. By the way, I wrote those lyrics." And I didn't know whether to believe him or not. His email address started with Jesmond, as in Jesmond the Family Berserker. Sure enough, he when I couldn't get tickets to Fish Halloween 1996 at the Omni in Atlanta, where they ended up covering the Talking Heads. Tom and I made a public grovel I used my, at that point I was doing Benjy's Digest, and I used my pulpit to try to find tickets for the shows. I did that several times. One time Trey's dad hooked me up, but this particular time it was Tom Marshall, and so I met him. He gave me a backstage pass that night. And we kept in touch. And so, and same with Richard Gere. Richard was way more accessible because he was a Village Voice music critic and wrote about fish. And at that point, I'm not sure if I'm confusing the timeline, but I was definitely writing about fish. I just don't know how professionally at that point, but wanted to. In fact, I remember asking Richard Gere how, after being frustrated at me trying to write a review, asking him how much of how much of his output does he feel is quality. And I remember him saying very little, and I was like, whew, so not every sentence needs to be brilliant. But then I remember trapping him in my car after a show in Albany, after a Fish show in Albany. I want to say 97. I'd have to fact check myself on that, but I'm pretty sure it was 1997. And I trapped him in my car because I gave him a ride, and I played Bernstein and Chasnoff for him. And I locked the door out. We were outside the Omni Hotel where he was getting the ride to, and I locked the door and wouldn't let him out until he had heard at least most of it, And his response is it supposed to sound like Susie Greenberg? You're getting sued from a dude who just don't know what happened. You're getting sued from a dude who tells us but then he saw the talent in the band. So
Discuss Biscuits was the first, I believe, online gathering place for Disco Biscuits fans. At first, there were 4 or 5 people on there, and it's really quite enjoyable to go back and read those initial conversations where you and Patrick Donahue, Dan Hantman from the Mockingbird Foundation, Mark Regopoulos, legendary Original Biscuits taper, Kevin Sturtz, Aaron Trooper McKeon. You're going through the process of not only connecting with one another, but building the foundation of the scene that I would come into about a year later. You're establishing an FAQ explaining who the band members are, what the meanings behind different songs were. You're setting up tape trading networks and trees and blanks and postage offers, lyrics files. You're essentially creating the scaffolding that is necessary for any band to go from just playing local bars, playing college campuses and fraternities, to having a scene. Was it a conscious effort on your part? Did you and there was I guess a committee, you called yourself HERS, Hantman, Eisen, Regopoulos, and Sturtz. Did you guys have it in mind to start building the infrastructure that existed in such a full form around Fish by this point? A very much grassroots organic infrastructure. Was it your intention to build that at a smaller scale for the Biscuits?
Well, I would love to go back and reread those early posts. I forgot all about hers, but I do know that we were doing what is natural for humans to do, which was emulating what we had seen. And so I think a part of that was, well, we knew one telltale facet of this scene that separates it from a lot of other music scenes was the level of obsession and of knowledge, its change, and wanting to know everything about a specific band. And I think a lot of it too was just like how I would go into the computer lab to learn everything I could about Fish. I think with the Disco Biscuits, we were laying that foundation. We didn't think of it in these grandiose terms because it wasn't. I don't think we weren't looking at it from a bird's eye view. We were looking at it as, this is what we know. This is how we can express ourselves as fans. It was now with, if you're really into Fish and you can spend, even if it's only a minute or two a day, you see Fish memes and you interact with your community that way. You go on Instagram or on Facebook, and there's all these Fish meme accounts there, and that's kind of how information now is spread a lot as well, and whatnot. But at the time, to be an active fan when the band wasn't playing, and this was a big part of our identity as we were fans that had this scene in this community. And so if we couldn't go out to a show, well, then we wanted talking about shows and doing what we had experienced in the fish scene, but there wasn't that for the Disco Biscuits. I remember like being, being frustrated that I didn't know Disco Biscuit set lists, that they would send out postcards with tour dates on them, and I would circle the dates that I could go to, and then probably call like Carla or Angelica or Dop and see, which shows we would carpool to, or which ones we were planning on going to. And then the ones that we didn't, I remember at one point even Mark Rogopoulos said he went to Memphis. I want to think it was the first Disco Biscuit show in Memphis. And he went because he knew that there wouldn't be any other tapers there. And so he went to make, it was almost like a duty, it was like, hey, like if there's no taper and we need to document this, so I'm going to drive all the way to Memphis just to do this. And I think that there was a lot of, it wasn't frustration because the band was so young and they were friends of ours, but I wanted to know everything. So when they played, a show in Ohio and I couldn't make it, and I would never know the set list. Like it was lost to the void. And so Discuss Biscuits was meant as a way that not only could I contribute everything that I knew, and through my, and all of our close proximity to the band and to each other, not only could we start to build the info base that, like you said, the original FAQ, the original fact, but also it was in hopes that, hey, maybe in a few months from now, somebody will be on here that when they're playing Ohio, they can tell us the set list.
Now, from being a part of that original group that founded Discuss Biscuits, you went on to collaborate with some of your friends from the Harrisburg, Mechanicsburg, Elizabethtown area to form Newmarket Productions. What was Newmarket Productions? What was the genesis? And what were some of your proudest accomplishments with that organization?
Well, Newmarket Productions was 4 of us with, I think, different goals, or at least for me, what it was Newmarket Productions was me experimenting and figuring out what I wanted to do professionally. And for the other guys, they all had jobs. They were a few years older than me. Jason Melham, for instance, was an architect at his dad's architect firm. Greg Mallon was a banker. So they all had, they had their careers and they were doing this kind of as a hobby, whereas or a potential career if it took off. Whereas I was looking at it as, well, I don't know that I want, we were a production company we were, promoters. We were figuring out what we were. But in turn, we were figuring out what we were as a company, and I was figuring out if that was what I wanted to dedicate my life to, or if it was a hobby, or if it was a temporary lark. And initially, we started promoting jam band scenes in the Harrisburg area. There's a promoter that to this day is a big part of the Harrisburg music scene called John Harris, and he was very much an early mentor to me in terms of the music industry side. He threw a music conference called Millennium it was a music conference for people from anyone from bands themselves looking to how do you put together a press kit to panels for aspiring managers. And I went and I soaked all of that in, and I went to him and I asked him if we could help promote the shows that he was putting on, because he was putting on jam band shows once a week at this place called Gillifty's Underground, and another place, I think it was called Doc Holidays. And the bands would be like Lake Trout, for instance, was one of them. Foxtrot Zulu, the Disco Biscuits for sure, Grinch as well. And as he was doing this, and we asked him if we could, promote. Originally, we were going to be his competition, but we didn't know what we were doing, and we didn't know how to book bands. We had no, we didn't have. We were just, college kids that loved this music, and the other three of them wanted to be involved out of passion, and again with me, it was passion and figuring out what I wanted to do. And so I remember going to him and asking if we could help promote his shows, and thinking that he gave us such a deal because we were going to promote his shows. In return, we were on the guest list, and I remember thinking that was the greatest thing ever, that we were going to, be able to go to all these shows for free just because we were promoting them by making flyers and handing out flyers, and having a newsletter. And then New Market Productions, one thing, we were united in our love for Fish and in our love for the Disco Biscuits. And both of those bands, I think, were we were seeing those bands more than we were seeing any other bands. And those were the two bands that excited us the most, that we were the most passionate about. And we were seeing a lot of the shows together. And from New Market Productions, we, started a festival, but before that, I think New Market Productions, one of the guys in New Market Productions, Mike Zarcone, we called him Bone, was his nickname. Bone was a computer guy and knew a little bit of coding, and he was able to build our first very primitive website and host the Disco Biscuits internet project, the BIP, as it were.
Yes. Which exists to this day and is still the resource I go to more than any other for any kind of historical details about the band's past performances, right up through the most up-to-date set lists with the most thoroughly annotated teases and samples and last time played and all of that stuff. So it's fascinating to hear that grew out of this initial collaboration. Now, one of the highlights of New Market Productions, from my standpoint, as a beneficiary of all of your work, as a consumer of what you did, were the festivals that you put on, specifically the Melstock Festival. Would you talk a little bit about Melstock, its genesis in 1998, and how it evolved in 1999 and became something much bigger, a legendary night, a legendary weekend in Disco Biscuits lore?
Well, I think if you ask all four of us, you'll get slightly different, not contradictory, but slightly different things because of our focuses. For me, I was very interested in a music festival. For Jason Melham, I suspect, and I'm friends with him to this day, mind you. I love the guy very much, and I think he was interested in having a festival specifically on his property, like his parents' property. Because he had the space for it and the place for it, and I think before Melstock, if I remember correctly, and this is where I think he might have a slightly different, but again not contradictory version of it, is that I think he had a private party that he was having on his property, and probably knowing him, he was throwing parties there in high school, and then it became let's actually make something where we can sell tickets and at that point we had been going to the All Good Music Festival, and there was a sister festival put on by Walther Productions, who does All Good. At this, he found this site in Maryland, in Brandywine, Maryland, called Wilmer's Park, and All Good Music Festival was I believe, I want to say it started out as a one-day festival, maybe even, and Autumn Equinox was the other one. So that he did, and I would go down there with the guys from New Market Productions, and as soon as we got down there, I think I scrambled and got lost and would just run around and do my thing. And then in the car ride back, we would talk about the highlights of the Disco Biscuits when they played there, and they had some mind-blowing sets there, and they were not headliners at all at that point. They were, if anything, the first band on. and bands like God Street Wine and Mo were the headliners typically. Ominous Sea Pods, who I mentioned before as well. Medeski, Martin and Wood. At one point, they had Jazz is Dead with Alfonso Johnson in it, and so the Disco Biscuits were, and they had Lake Trout and the Slip as well, and the Disco Biscuits were kind of like the rowdy. The rowdy black sheep of all that, and also the upstarts. They were the scrappy upstarts. But Walther saw early on that people like me, that's what we were. We were there for all of it, but that saw the Disco Biscuits in particular that get a very strong response. And that when he put them on at noon, we were all there at noon, and not just paying attention, but fully into it. Gathering of the Vibes too is another one I remember where the Disco Biscuits played a set that was the very first set of the day, and having partied all night long, it was really hard to get to, but we made sure to get there to support our guys, and promoters took note of that. So Melstock came out of that, and for me, it came out of going to these festivals, which at the time were all boutique festivals. There was no Bonnaroo; it did not exist yet. There was no Coachella. There was no Lollapalooza. The closest thing we had to that was, as I mentioned earlier, the Horde Festival, which was a major touring one-day event with bands like Blues Traveler, Fish, Allman Brothers, Rusted Root, Dave Matthews Band. I'm talking about these boutique music festivals that would set up with 1,500 people, maybe, in the audience, or less, and in our case, it was hundreds, not 1,000, it was hundreds. And so I saw all of these festivals going up, and I don't remember specifically the other guys' motivations behind it, but for me, I really wanted to be a part of it. Just like how going online as a writer to participate in the community, that this was just the next expression of it. This was like, oh, I love going to these festivals. I want to put one on. I want to be a part of this. And the Disco Biscuits were, for all of us, a big motivating factor in wanting to do it, because we really wanted the Disco Biscuits to play in Jason Melham's backyard for our friends.
So Melstock 1 occurred in June 1998. This is the period when the Biscuits are starting to build up that momentum that will take them to escape velocity.
Thank you guys so much, man. This is truly awesome. This is like the Blue Terrapin outdoors. Like truly awesome.
I wasn't at that Melstock. I only came on board a few months later. Was the first Melstock just the Biscuits, or did you have a lineup of other bands as well?
There was a lineup of other bands. It was a full one-day festival. I would have to go back to look to see who. I can tell you some of the bands that played overall, but I wouldn't remember which year they played. I know Juggling Sons was on there. which was the Disco Biscuits' first label mates when they were on Hydroponics label for Johnny Zazula. And I believe The Slip was on there as well. And Delusions of Grandeur, which was a band that predated what became Quagmire Swim Team. And I'd have to go back and look. In my mind, because we were so focused on the Disco Biscuits, and they were our big get. Even in '98, it didn't seem like a big get because they were so. It was like, hey, do you want to go and play Melham's Backyard? Yeah, $400. Yes, we'll do it. And I think it was $400 that year, and I might be corrected on this by some of the other Newmarket guys, but in my mind, I think the next year it was like $600 that we got them for.
Well, in the second iteration of Melstock, the one that I was able to attend, that was the one where you pulled off one of the great stunts in Disco Biscuits history, if not jamband history. Picture it. We're all assembled on the grounds of the Melham family farm in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. Beautiful, bucolic, hot as all get out. No cell phones, people just living in the moment. Great music, as you mentioned. The lineup I have here: Hexbelt, Into the Woods, Juggling Sons, and The Slip, my other favorite jam band from back in that period. Promise of a Barber acoustic performance, one that has rightfully gone down as a legendary moment of Barber comedy, if not music.
Okay, Mr. Djembe. With the funny outfit. Now, let me ask you something. What's the deal with the outfit? I'm asking on behalf.
You know what? I didn't even wear this outfit tonight until the Disco Biscuits came on.
Oh, you didn't wear it till we came on?
Not at all. And then when you guys came on, I grabbed my sparklers, I grabbed my clown outfit.
Oh, yeah?
And it was like that.
Wait, you just grabbed your clown outfit? Because I couldn't do this. Because I don't have the clown outfit. You keep the hat. It obviously matches. No, okay, I'll match you.
In that second set, everyone is having a peak experience, so to speak, at that point. It's been a long day of music and fun outside in the hot sun. And the band comes out for set 2 and opens with Morph. And then they start up Helicopters. Benjy, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, I remember as we were planning these festivals, obviously it almost goes without saying we were very, very influenced by Phish and by, I particularly, since my first show was a New Year's Eve show where Phish played in an aquarium, I was... turned the arena into an aquarium, and right before midnight, they came down from the ceiling in wetsuits and then swam into a giant clam, which exploded and said "Happy New Year's," New Year's 1993 and 1994, or Happy 1994, and being influenced by those types of stunts, I really wanted to do one myself, and I remember our meetings at Melstock were in 2 of them lived in a house in Camp Hill together, and we would meet in their basement and for our weekly meeting, and we would sit around smoking weed and talking ideas. And I think for the first Melstock, I'm glad I let you take lead on this because again, both of them kind of in my mind are one, but the first one, it was I stole the idea from Phish, but didn't hide that fact. But we had macaroni and cheese. We grabbed all these macaroni and cheese boxes and handed them out to the crowd to use as shakers for when the biscuits were on. And I want to say it was Shem Rabu. It was some song, but it was a very intentional pre-constructed moment. And then I remember, collecting the boxes, and we got to, we donated them to, afterwards to like a soup kitchen or something, but we used them as percussion. I remember Brownie not being so happy to learn that Fish had done that beforehand. But so we wanted something original, and we started talking, and Helicopters was at that point a brand new song. Do you know by any chance how like when since in front of you, do you know when Helicopters debuted in relation to that?
Well, this was
Happy New Year.
Helicopters was a 1990. Well, there's
What a Show started
it.
Yeah. So What a Show started it at the TLA, the night with Mike Gordon.
What a venue, what a show, it's the place I go. What a venue, what a show, it's in the place I go.
Yes. Helicopters had its proper debut on August 28th, 1998 at the Wetlands, a show where they debuted Helicopters, Fiddler, and a little tune by the name of Ida Fifth.
So Helicopters at that point, new one of the new song cycles, and it did come out of What a Show, and I loved What a Show for what it was, but it was, I remember even and getting scolded again by Brownstein for saying the truth, which is, well, the song is great, but it's very limiting, don't you think? Because it was specifically written about about them playing the Theater of Living Arts, because
yes,
the TLA was such a milestone for them, as I had mentioned in that review, which wasn't super favorable musically, but it was of them. It was their first time that they were in a theater, and you have to, as a band, every time you get into a bigger room, you have to learn how to play it, because it's a different skill set. It's not just for the sound guy, but for the band themselves. You play differently in a bar than you do in a theater, and you play differently in a theater than you do in an arena. And but anyway, so that song turned into Helicopters, and we use that as a jumping off point for us talking about what we could do as a gag. And I think one of the four of us somehow knew somebody that had a helicopter license, and it was like in my memory, it was an off-duty cop that did it. And I remember, I remember when I was pitching my side of it to the guys, I was like, okay, so what we should do is have a helicopter come in, swoop in over the crowd, scare everybody, look out below, and drop bombs on them but by bombs have it be glow necklaces, and from there, all four of us can take credit for shaping the idea, and for, we workshopped it for a while, and some of it was actually, as all these things go, it was, as it went along, it took on a life of its own. And so part of that was that the so let me back up and I'll let you talk about what happened, and then I'll tell you what happened behind the scenes there.
Well, from my standpoint in the crowd, we all thought we were getting busted. We thought the gig is up. This is it. The black helicopters are circling, that famous scene at the end of Goodfellas. We're all going to jail, because what we're doing right here, this can't be having this much fun on a farm in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. We've got to be in violation of some local ordinance.
Helicopter!
there was a collective freak out in the crowd, followed by the realization that this was actually for our entertainment, that this was, I mean, this was the ultimate trip toy. This was, you had gone out of your way to plan out for us this experience that was so surprising because, you know, if you're thinking about where we were and the scope of the operation, this was very much a mom and pop. Benjy and Jason and a few other guys we knew, friends of ours, putting this on. By no means did we envision that you would have ever had the wherewithal, let alone the follow through, to come up with this and execute on it. So there was that temporary moment of people thinking, do I actually need to run for my life? As the Plan B Run for My Life chorus was being vocal jammed and looped through the field or the tent where we were listening to the music, followed by this realization that the sky was the limit, that anything we dreamed up, no matter how preposterous, could in fact happen, that there was this sense of possibility that our dreams could come true, that not only could we have this experience together, but who knew what was next? This band was going somewhere. And this was, for us, I think, a moment that really hammered that home, that this wasn't just some jam band, that this was something special.
Well, it brings me such joy to hear you say that, because it was designed to be a trip toy and designed, again, very influenced by Fish from their gags for, you know, especially for New Year's Eve, but also at their festivals. And that when they do those production things that are designed to provide psychedelic moments or to boost psychedelic moments and to give you to blow your mind, essentially, you know, in a very fun way. And so that's where this came from, because of course the lyric, as everybody knows, it's helicopters look out below. So it was, well, let's have a real helicopter come in and swoop in over the crowd and drop what it turned into after workshopping the idea. And also, I think Greg was the one that was interfacing, Greg or maybe Jason was interfacing with the actual pilot. And there was talk about how he couldn't go beneath like 250 feet or something. He's an off-duty cop, and he said, "Don't worry about it. He's going to go lower than he's allowed." You know, but we had him, you know, drop these what eventually turned into pillowcases, I believe. They were filled with we had Melstock, and we made sure that it wouldn't hurt if anybody, you know, that was a big part of it. We dropped them in places where we knew people wouldn't be, and also we didn't want glow. At that point, the glow sticks had within, you know, it was just within a year or two of glow sticks becoming a big thing at Fish shows, and there was a movement against them because they were hurting people, and you know, as they were being thrown through the air, and we didn't want that, obviously. So we had glow necklaces and we had balloons. Not blown up, but just the balloons that said Melstock on it, that when you went over and got it, then you could blow it up or you could keep the balloon as a souvenir. And that came directly from Fish's New Year's Eve shows, where they have things that you can, you know, souvenirs, whether it's golf balls with their name on it or hot dogs or whatever it is. But I remember the off-duty cop. I remember that there are two funny things with it. One, not just to him, but to the local police department, we branded it as a private event, and we also said it was a folk music happening, because we didn't, you know, we didn't want to draw unnecessary attention. So we said it's folk music that's happening. I think maybe some of my partners I remember that they had to go and talk to the police department at one point and maybe make up a tats or some sort of, you know, something that some type of permit. But and then the only cop that actually came onto the property besides the off-duty one that flew above it was when his car broke down, and he went to the very edge where we had our ticket booth. And he knew better than to come on because he didn't want to be busting people. And he just said, "Hey, my car broke down. I'm just going to make a call." Something like that. I wasn't, I didn't interact with him directly, so I don't know about that. But I do remember keeping this a secret from the Disco Biscuits and wanting it to be a surprise for them. Until
I
right
didn't know
before.
that.
Well, they knew before they went on stage, but they had already wrote their set list. And I remember going up to them because we kept it a secret until 15 minutes before they went on stage, because we thought that if we told them that this was happening, then everybody was going to know somehow or other. Like it would leak.
Yes.
And we didn't want any leaks. We wanted it to be a total surprise. So I told them, I like gathered them around and I said, listen, you're going to have to put helicopters on your set list. And I remember immediately them like, why, and I said, because we have a helicopter that's going to come in. We need a 15-minute or 5-minute, whatever it was. We needed a little heads up. So BARBER and I came up with a thing where the band was going to give me a hand signal. And when they did, they were going to go, at that point, I was going to radio for the helicopter to come in. And it would still take, it must have been more like 5 minutes than 15. But from that point, the helicopter was going to come in and swoop in timed with the song. And I'm sitting, and even though it was my festival, I wasn't being super responsible, and I may have been on some light psychedelics myself. And I remember looking for BARBER's hand signal, but the way that what it was sort of like a downward motion with the hand, his strumming hand. And so like a very subtle motion, almost like in blackjack when you're saying hit or stay, just a very subtle hand motion. And I remember paying very close attention, but not being confident when I saw it, that's what it was versus him just jamming out. So because of that, the jam had to be extended a little bit longer, because eventually he looked at me like, where is this, thing? And then I radioed, and then suddenly you could see the spotlight come in. And the idea was not to scare people, but the idea was to create the psychedelic moment, a spotlight coming closer and closer and closer until people realize that as the band is singing Helicopters Look Out Below, there actually was a helicopter, and that it wasn't a coincidence. It was actually coming for them and dropping these things on the perimeter. And it was, it was a very psychedelic and very cool moment. But everybody, as you said, I didn't know that was your reaction, and I love hearing that, because I knew that was a reaction that happened. And I remember hours later, Brownie and I were walking around the campsite, and it was a very small festival. So we were walking around, and we were talking to people who that was their first Disco Biscuit show. And and one guy said, man, it was great until the feds came. And he goes, I ran into the woods. I ditched all of my my stash. I buried it, and then I took off all my clothes and went and I hid in my tent. And I remember Brownie looking at him like, why'd you do that? and then somebody else came up to Brownie to thank him because of he wanted to thank him because of the helicopter that the Disco Biscuits brought in to drop Molly on everybody. And he's like, yeah, they just dropped it into the air, so we all just breathed it, and now we're all on Molly. And I remember thinking, like, you sure it wasn't something you took? And incidentally, when Brownie and I were walking around and he asked me, he wanted to see the grounds, I said, over there is an area we call Camp Bisco, because it was the camping area, and on the map we labeled it Camp Bisco.
More on that in a moment, but I need to wind back a few months before this to another important milestone in the Biscuits history that you were a part of. And that was, of course, the debut performance of the Hot Air Balloon on December 31st, 1998 at Silk City. I just found out, and I don't know how I went 25 years without knowing this, that you contributed writing to the hot air balloon handbill that was distributed to all attendees that night. As we walked in, we were given a playbill in the style of what you receive while attending a Broadway show. And I still have a few copies of those in my personal archive with descriptions of the songs and a synopsis of the plot of the rock opera. Now, I want to know about your involvement in the process. Obviously, that indicates that you were aware that John was working on this. Very few people were. But I also want to talk about your decision to attend Silk City, because in my recollection, and I may be hyperbolizing through the lens of nostalgia and memory, before LeBron had his big decision taking his talent to Miami, Benjy had his big moment where he decided that he wasn't going to go see Phish at Madison Square Garden on New Year's Eve, 1998. He was going to go to a diner in Philadelphia and spend that night with 150 other crazy people, myself included, who had decided that this was the place that we needed to be on this evening.
We know that a lot of you people struggled with whether or not to come to Silk City tonight. We truly, truly, absolutely appreciate the fact that those of you who struggled so hard internally with what you were going to do on New Year's Eve decided to spend it with the Disco Biscuits.
Am I remembering correctly that this was a huge brought decision for you? Because I remember finding out that you were going to be there and feeling a sense of validation in my own decision. Well, if Benjy and Andy Gadiel are going to be there, the two icons of online Phish culture, people around my age who were leading figures in the scene, were choosing to go with the Biscuits, then clearly I'm in the right place. What was that process of deciding to be at Silk City like for you?
It was pretty much a game time decision because Carla and I think Andy as well. Andy was driving there from New York, and I want to say that we were in the same car together. But what I really remember was that Carla and I were agonizing. At least I was agonizing over this decision because it was the very first. It wasn't just the debut of their rock opera. It was their very first New Year's Eve show. And since New Year's Eve 93 was my first Phish show, I had decided I'm never going to miss a Phish New Year's Eve. And with the Disco Biscuits, I made a few other, proclamations like that. One was I'm never going to miss a Blue Terrapin show. One was I promised Brownie, I made a deal with him that I wouldn't miss the Disco Biscuits first time that they played Red Rocks, because that was inevitable and I wouldn't miss it. And I did miss it. And he kept up his end of the bargain, which was if the band ever played Jane's Addiction's 3 days, 3 Wishes, no, 3 days. 3 Wishes is 3 days live. Yes. That he would give me a heads up so that I could be there. And he fulfilled his end of the bargain. And I forget why I had to miss their debut at Red Rocks, but I remember he knew that I didn't fulfill my end of that bargain. But going back to the New Year's Eve thing, I remember Brownie said something to me when he was at those. I remember him being either they were at the shows, the Phish shows beforehand, or they were doing their own after shows. But I remember him saying, when he asked me what I was doing on New Year's Eve, saying that I would be at Phish, he said I would be there too if I didn't have to work. But then I remember thinking, how special is it that our friends are playing their very first New Year's Eve show, and we want to support them and we want to be there for them. And it was so small that we knew that they would see, not that it was about us and not or anything like that, but we wanted them to feel that this, and us feel like this is a special moment. Let's celebrate this moment. Let's really, this is, you never, you only have one first time ever playing New Year's Eve, and so in my mind, it's like, okay, I'm probably going to go back to St. Fish after this, but this is a momentous night. And with them doing the rock opera that they had been working on, I remember that night thinking that I was hearing, that we all were hearing the music of the future. And, and at that point too, the Biscuits had solidified, not their sound, since like every band, I mean, you could say the Biscuits in the past few years have gone in a new direction, but just like with Fish, but at the same time, they have they're still very much sound, no matter what direction the Disco Biscuits have gone in ever since this time period, they always still sound like the Disco Biscuits. And this was the beginning of that sound. And these songs were the beginning of something that pushed them into the era where they had their very own identity. They weren't a Fish offshoot. They weren't, just another jam band. They were a band that if you wanted to hear this music, you had to hear it from this band because they were inventing the sound. And I remember as they were playing it, thinking, I'm hearing the music of the future. And I remember very specifically thinking too with these songs, like, I'm going to be listening to these songs in the new millennium. After 2000, this is the music that I'll be listening to. Fish as well, but Fish at that point weren't changing the way that this was. And I just remember thinking they're onto something so new that it could possibly be an entirely new genre, and other bands could follow. And I felt that we were in that room when that happened, and I felt very much like it was the reason I'll let Carla speak for herself, but I do remember both of us agonizing over this decision, because it was so, at least in me, having promised myself that I would never miss a Fish New Year's Eve, and having that be such a big part of my identity, but also being such an active part of the Disco Biscuit scene, it was split in two. And, and I remember then Andy being like, I'm going to see the Disco Biscuits. And when Andy said that, I think that, Carla and I talked about it and debated it. And I remember selling my ticket to New Year's Eve for Fish, to get into the car, to drive down to Philadelphia. To Andy and Carla and I we were all talking about, about that, and about how it was such a historic night, and also how these songs, suddenly, just like how I discovered Gamehenge after hearing Lizards, and then realized it's part of a bigger thing. That's when you learn that these songs are a rock opera that the Biscuits are have put together. And this was its very much debut. And just like how when I saw Fish, it was different for me than when I had seen the Grateful Dead, and that it seemed like, this is more my time, this is my scene. Well, suddenly the Disco Biscuits was even more that, because these are my friends doing their rock opera. It wasn't like learning about Gamehenge. It was, this is the hot air balloon. This is what my friends are doing right now. And not only is it what they're doing, and it's one thing, I mean, I've had lots of friends do lots of cool things, and it's like they're doing cool things and they're friends of mine and I support them. This was different. This was saying what these guys are doing, even if they weren't my friends, even if I didn't know them, these guys are honestly carving out the future of where music is going. This merging of electronic with organic. And and you could say culture at large has just been, that was almost that almost had portend for where culture at large would go from there, from merging the electronic with the organic, which has been, still even to this day, a very much of a hot topic with AI and AGI and everything that's happening. Well, you could say that was, a harbinger of that. That was also very much reflective of that, of the technology becoming available, so that, becoming available to Magner in particular, with the keyboards and some of the things that they were doing as they were listening. I wasn't listening to the electronica that I know that they were in their house, Square Pusher and bands like that, because I was hearing about it from them, and I was going to Crystal Method and and a few. I was getting my feet wet with some electronica, usually because one of those guys told me about it. Or because it was on Discuss Biscuits or something like that, Chemical Brothers. But, and then Amon Tobin and things like that and a little bit later. But really for me, it was watching the Disco Biscuits merge the two, knowing that when I was at Fish, it felt very much like it felt very parallel to raves and to rave culture, and that it was a bunch of young college kids going someplace to dance for hours, probably on drugs, not mandated, but predominantly, and having these marathon nights followed by sunrises, because you're up all night with people that you're bonding with that you feel that are helping shape your personality, as well as your world views, as well as your community, and that night at Silk City Diner, not only did we not have any regrets for going there, and am I so grateful and thankful that I was there, but to me, it just, it was another milestone for the Disco Biscuits. They had arrived. They did their own New Year's Eve show. They did their own rock opera, and then to me, a big part of it too was when they invited the entire audience back to their house for a party.
After the show tonight, everybody in the joint, you're all invited up to our house. We're having a little cast party, hot air balloon cast party. Because the party is surely not going to end at 2 o'clock. So, on the back of the hot air balloon flyers that we handed out at the door, there's directions from Silk City to our house in Upper Darby. It's about a 10-minute drive, nothing serious. Please be quiet when you're getting out of your cars and walk into our house, because it's a family neighborhood. So we're going to try and just keep it down, and then when we get in the house, we'll rage all night. So everybody's invited to our house. We're going to fucking all night. Yeah, I'm sorry, this is Rick. He is the party master, and he wants the party to go on for 3 days, folks.
And I remember thinking that this is how communities are like fostered, nurtured. It was intentional on their part of, hey, we're not just the band that's going to come to your town and help you party down. We're creating an actual and real community that they themselves were invested in as much as we were.
Going back and rereading some of the posts on Discuss Biscuits from that period, November, December 1998, it's remarkable to see this unfolding email by email. Mark posting on the fan message board, calling out fans by name. Hey, so-and-so, I noticed you haven't gotten your ticket yet. I saw you at that show last weekend and you said you were thinking about coming. In a public forum, the band members goading the fans to action. And of course, not just doing it in a one-sided, selfish way, we want to sell this venue out, but doing it out of a sense of wanting to foster this community. And the party in Upper Darby afterwards, I left that thinking, here I was, someone who spent most of his life up until that point feeling like I had been born 20 years too late, 30 years too late, whatever, that I had meant to be at the acid tests, that's where I should have been. And I came out of that show at Silk City feeling like, oh no, I was born at the exact right time. I was meant to be here. This is my generation's version of that. This is not going and standing in a crowded auditorium and watching a band and going home. This is being a part of something.
That's
we took that energy. Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's exactly how I felt. And I felt, I mentioned earlier that I was reading Relics magazine front to back, and I was reading it could have been Smithsonian Institute, magazine for all that matter, except that it had to do with music that I loved and that I and connected with, but that wasn't of my time. The Grateful Dead were talked about in the press a lot at that point as a relic from the 60s. As if you want to go and experience, it's almost like going to a museum exhibit. It's if you want to go and experience 60s counterculture in 1994, you can go and you can see the Grateful Dead in a stadium, and you can see the circus that they bring in, the hippies and all that. Whereas this, we were creating it, and we were creating it by being ourselves, but by being together and being of the time of the day and age, and then doing when the band would go to people's houses afterwards to party, or to hang out, or even to sleep, to crash. It was them participating and being a part of this community, and in doing so, helping to shape it. We have our community, especially back then when it was smaller. It felt like there were no bad actors. Back then we had a lot of trust. We let each other into each other's houses. And in some cases, I remember the night before Melstock, the band slept in my parents' house, and Rochambeau for who slept on the couch versus who slept on the extra bed. And my mom, went out and bought filet mignons for us to grill on the grill. We're bringing these people into our homes. And in some cases, like you at your place in Brown, you're inviting, we weren't strangers by any means, but like there was a lot of trust to say, hey, Benjy, you can come and stay with me and crash, and the band can as well, and anyone here. And I remember at your place in particular, one of the things that I remember about it, I don't know if you will even remember this, is we watched Family Guy, and it was it was either, I think it was the very first Family Guy. It was like the pilot. Of it, and I remember watching it and having my mind blown by it.
Yeah.
But we had these experiences together, very trusting, and also by doing that, we were they were formative years for all of us, including the band.
Yes.
And so we were, I said, building our worldview. We were building our sense of community, our ethics, our language that we had. We had our own, lexicon. And we had our own rules of engagement and behavior as to what was acceptable and what wasn't. You're allowed to be on a head full of drugs and out of your mind. Yes. Are you allowed to be violent? No. Are you allowed to mistreat people? We just had these things that we had a shared sense of values, and a part of that goes back to the whole like attracts like, and this music attracts a certain type of people. But we very easily vetted and rooted out anybody that wasn't, energetically on our wavelength.
And the example was set by the band itself. They were the role models, as weird as it sounds to call those four guys role models, but they were modeling the behavior and the form of community that we were all co-creating ourselves. And that winter, we took that momentum, and there were so many interesting things that took place. One of which wasn't even a show, which was that while the band was on the road that January, February, and March, their roommate, Rick Rude, would host parties at the band's house where fans who couldn't make it out west to follow the band on their January, their winter and spring tour would just go and party at the Biscuits house with one another. And there would be DJs, and there'd be just hangs, weekend-long hangs where people would go to just see each other, because we wanted to recapture that sense of connection that the Biscuits created, even if we couldn't be at the shows. Now, the other thing was there were great shows. And, you mentioned earlier that run in January that included the infamous Pancake House Flapjacks show in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania, that Jeremy Shealy put together along with some of his friends. But there were some other great moments during that tour. I just wanted to see if you had any recollections of that month. Started out at State College with a great show at the Crowbar. Then we went to Dillsburg. And from there, a show in between, but a show that I know was very special to you, the Stone Church show in Newmarket, New Hampshire. And that entire month, performances of the Hot Air Balloon again, benefit shows, some of the most exciting musical and social experiences of my young life at that point. But I wanted to just go back and see if you have any standout signal memories from that January 1999 tour, where we were all feeling still that energy and charge that came from Silk City.
I definitely do. The Stone Church, as you just mentioned, I got to help write the set list for it, and that therefore, became very near and dear to me. And I remember sitting down and arguing for certain concepts and certain sandwiches and certain things that should happen, and then to see it happen in front of my eyes, which of course, there's no. Now in my life, I get to have a say in other set lists, and even fairly well, I got to have a say in it, which is insane. But at the time, it was the only chance that I ever had, and in my mind, the only chance I ever would have to be able to sit down and as a writer and as such a fan of music that listens to it so much, a set list determines so much about a show, because it's the flow, and a good set list tells a story and has a narrative arc to it. And I didn't have that skill at that point, but it was my first crack at it. And I remember loving, afterwards when people remarked about the set list, I remember, feeling like this, like I got to be the Disco Biscuits created magic, and they let me kind of touch that magic or be around it and be some small part of it, which was really, really cool. Going back to and I did that whole run. I think Ocean Mist was that on that run as well, or is that later on?
That was later on. That was that April run that was April. Brought you to Providence.
Yes. Okay, so but then and the Crowbar show I remember as well very vividly, and watching how they had grown so fast in State College, which is funny because by some standards you'd say the Crowbar is a small club. At the time it was they made it. It was, oh my God, they're at the Crowbar, and there are people outside that have never, that I was talking to that had never seen them before, and it was there for every single Disco Biscuit show at this point was someone's new show, and every single night, a large part of the crowd was seeing their first or possibly second show, and then that's how we grew. But going back, I do want to touch upon one thing you mentioned, and that's the Rick Rude's parties. There was one in particular that really stood out to me because it was a landmark in the Disco Biscuits history that none of us could participate in, and that's that they drove out to Colorado to open for Mo at the Fox Theater. And it meant a lot to the band at the time. It was a big opportunity for them. It was their first time playing the Fox. I think their first time opening for Mo one of their biggest non-festival audiences at that time. And they were really excited about it. And Rick Rude threw what was called a virtual pool party at his house. And I wrote about it, not published yet, in a book of fiction that will one day see the light of day, called Oysterland. You talked in the very beginning, as when you introed me, you talked about the pearl. And that's really funny because this whole book, a lifelong passion project of a fictional book, but called Oysterland, because it's about how we're all shucking oysters looking for pearls. And I just remember that. So I fictionalized it for this book, and one day it will come out. But the party itself, he turned their rehearsal room, which was soundproofed, into a virtual pool by means of pounds and pounds of packing peanuts. And so he had packing peanuts that were piled, 3 feet high, so you could swim across in them. When he had a DJ in the other room, and I remember, I was on ecstasy that night, and I hope I can say that on this podcast, and that you guys
can.
Yes, okay. So because I don't mind admitting that, but I swam across the room, and I remember being enthralled with that room, probably because of my headspace, and swimming in these packing peanuts that he had. Every fourth or fifth one was painted with Daedlow paint, and the walls were Daedlow. And the Disco Biscuits were not aware that in their practice room this huge party was happening, and in their entire house really, but that he had turned the practice room into a pool. And I accidentally swallowed a packing peanut because I was swimming, and I remember going in or not a full one, but like a part of one. And when someone said, "Are you okay?" I just remember saying, "If I die, please do not let them say that this college kid eats ecstasy or takes ecstasy and eats packing peanuts," because then that will become this urban legend or this urban myth that's what happens if you end up taking MDMA, you could eat packing peanuts and die.
You'd be the cautionary tale told at a DARE meeting in an elementary school somewhere in central Pennsylvania.
I probably am anyway. but then the Disco Biscuits, I remember Rick Rubin calling them, or maybe they called him, but I remember there was a phone call happened where he held the phone, the receiver up to hear, to have all of us cheer to him saying, "Hey, we're all at your house, we're all at the house and we're partying on your behalf, cheering you on for your victory in Colorado."
That's amazing. Well, Benjy, we've gone so long and we haven't even gotten out of the 1990s, which makes me think there will probably have to be a part 2, a part 3, a part 4 of this conversation. But for the time being, I don't want to wrap on this portion of our look back without acknowledging and giving you your due credit for something that, as you mentioned earlier, you initially coined and came up with the idea for. I think I have the first known utterance or first known instance of you broaching this topic, this idea, again, from the aforementioned Discuss Biscuits. In April of 1999, Dean Budnick was producing or getting ready to produce a series of shows for jambands.com, promoting the site, his book, everything that they had going on. There were a series of shows, including one at Wetlands, a great stacked bill where you basically had every cool band in the scene playing one after the other after the other. But they were discussing the possibility of there being a multiple night stand on that tour in Martha's Vineyard. And on Wednesday, April 14th, 1999, Benjy wrote to our mailing list, 3 nights in Martha's Vineyard as part of the jamband.com tour is just too much for me not to follow through with this idea. Look for an announcement about Camp Bisco coming soon. Now, that was the first time I or anybody else heard the words Camp Bisco put together. You didn't tell us what it was going to be. You did a great job in the kind of P.T. Barnum mode that you so easily slip into, of giving us just enough of a kernel to get us excited, to get us speculating. And over the next few weeks, you could see people talk, Camp Bisco, what will it involve? Will there be color war? Will it be like summer camp? Will we sleep outside? Where will we be? What was your idea? And how did that translate from the Camp Bisco that never happened in Martha's Vineyard, that you had all of us very excited about that April, to Camp Bisco at Melstock? There was a Camp Bisco at the canceled All Good Festival in May of 1999. And then ultimately, in June of that year, there was Camp Bisco, the festival that came to become one of the most important festivals for bringing together the worlds of electronic and improvised music, and that created a legacy and a scene that I think is still very much defining of jam band culture.
Well, I think with Martha's Vineyard, I obviously spoke too soon. And I went on and made a post because it was my intention. And the same reasons that I've, helped form New Market Productions, I was just trying to, I was looking for, I didn't have a full-time job. I was looking for things that I wanted to do. And also, I think for me, I was looking for a way to kind of contribute to the community in a bigger way than just making some posts on DiscussBiscuits. And when I saw that they were doing a multiple night in Martha's Vineyard, to me, this predates, as we said earlier, not only does it predate Bonnaroo and all of the modern rock festivals, there were ones happening in Europe, and not to say that Woodstock, didn't happen in America years before, but they weren't like it is now, where bands of a smaller size can actually have their own festival, and there's all these destination festivals and boutique festivals and things like that. And so I thought, if the band's playing for 3 nights in Martha's Vineyard, that it would be cool to organize, a kind of a group package where we could take over a local campground, and we could, and I think being on Fish Tour earlier than, and staying in campgrounds the first few times that I did Fish Tours. And when I say Fish Tours, I mean a week or two at a time. But at Deer Creek, there were these campgrounds that were legendary, where if you went to Deer Creek and of a certain age, before anybody was getting hotel rooms and staying in hotel rooms, and everybody was camping out of necessity because we were college kids, it was a scene that at Deer Creek you wanted to be in those campgrounds. And I had so much fun at places like that. Which is funny. I'm not really a camper by nature, but that part of it was out of necessity. But the idea came to me of, well, if they're going to be playing for these multiple nights, let's make it so that it's more all encompassing, and let's make this an experience. And so I looked into chartering a tour bus, like a Greyhound type bus, not tour bus, and I looked into, in my mind, I was going to try very much to put together an actual, like a camp where for one group price you get to, and therefore I think a lot of the motivation behind it, I think, was to get me up there for the shows. And so it was like, okay, well, I'll organize this trip where, and I had this idea of being like a camp counselor with a megaphone, where I was like, I'm going to corral all my friends and we're going to get up there and I'm somehow going to figure out how to get everybody from the campgrounds to the shows. And it's going to be a gathering place for our community, because the shows are at night. And if we're going to be up there for 3 days, let's have an immersive experience, because there weren't, the holidays was a far off idea. at that
Yeah.
point. And there was no CID. So even the idea of getting, of shuttling to the shows was a foreign idea. And I was trying to, it was like it was the predecessor to all of that. And it was just an idea that the more I looked into and the more I researched, the more I realized I was in over my head, and there wasn't enough of a demand for it. 12 or 13 people didn't wasn't going to cut it. And so I tabled the idea at the time, but Camp Bisco was the name that I had come up with for that idea.
Well, another instance where your audacious imagination was perhaps ahead of its time. It might not have been feasible in 1999 for the Disco Biscuits to have that kind of immersive experience. But what you're basically describing is what we all do now, and what's done not only in the jam band world, but at Coachella, at EDC, all around the world. People have these experiences, Bonnaroo obviously, defined by that creation of an imaginary space where the typical rules don't apply, where you can wear different clothes, be someone else, experience the transcendence of live improvisational music, consciousness alteration, and community. And I love the fact that so many of the harebrained, crazy ideas you've come up with, Benjy, whether they happened a few months later with the helicopter circling over the Melham's farm or decades later, you have the audacity to dream big and to not let silly things like reality limit the scope of your imagination. And it's just something I've always admired about you. It's something that I think has really made such a massive contribution to our scene. And it's something that always makes me excited to know what you're working on, because I always know that whatever Benjy's talking about, if not now, then someday we'll all be doing it. We'll all be talking about it. We'll all just say, I can't even remember a time when life didn't involve the Grateful Dead and the Disco Biscuits, being creative collaborators, or, all of the different things that you have been a part of, ideas that any sane person, any more pessimistic person would say, Benjy, that's a bad idea. That's a stupid idea. How are we going to do that? You've always just approached those situations and said, it seems like from my perspective, at least, and said, we'll figure it out. And in most of the cases you have.
There's definitely an element of Forrest Gump to it where and like blind luck, where I say, well, why not? Like, why can't we do this? And then just out of, out of luck or whatever it is, and not everything works, but it's been really incredible to be able to see some things actually happen, and the way that I told Magner when I first started writing with Billy, with Kreutzmann, I told Magner someday I think you're gonna end up playing with him. If I have anything to do with it, I would love for you and Billy to play together. And then of course Billy and the Kids happened. And so, it's just, it's been an incredible, amazing journey.
Well, let's save that and all of the other parts of this story for another episode. I've already kept you long enough, but Benjy, thank you so much for coming on Touchdowns All Day. And beyond that, thank you for upwards of 30 years being such a big part of this community that I love to be a part of.
Well, I would like to return that compliment to you genuinely, Matt, because of your contribution to the Disco Biscuit scene is, I say without hyperbole, it's immeasurable. You really have brought so much to it. I've known you now for decades, and early on you brought that, just in terms of before you had any official role. You brought it because the thing that I was talking about, how we all were building this community together. I have very vivid memories of you being the conductor, at shows, and of you just bringing your energy to it, and then from there also bringing skill sets to it, and now continuing touchdowns all day. And just being such an important part of our community that really helps the community thrive.
Oh, thank you, Benjy.
We're mass communicating. We're mass communicating. We're mass communicating. We're mass communicating.